Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
Good evening, I'm Maria Garcia. Glad you're joining us tonight. This week, the El Paso City Council got a big petition with more than 10,000 signatures asking it to start a program that has been controversial in other cities. A municipal ID program would provide IDs to those who often have a hard time obtaining identifiable documents. In some cases, transgender individuals, the homeless, and undocumented immigrants. The Border Network for Human Rights, who submitted the petition, says the IDs could help 40,000 people in El Paso. They say the estimate comes from the Migration Policy Institute, a Washington think tank. Now, these individuals often don't have an ID when they're stopped by police, and supporters say providing them with an ID can promote public safety. Opponents of these programs, they say municipal IDs encourage illegal immigration. Then there's the cost. New York City spent about $8 million to get its program started, but it's also the biggest one in the nation. Joining us tonight, Robert Heyman with the Border Network for Human Rights and Barbara Carrasco, who's opposed to the program, plus Deputy City Manager David Almonte, who's been researching the topic. You can reach us by phone at 915-496-1775 or via email at ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com. You can also tweet me at MariaGABC7 if you have comments or questions for our guest. You can also use the hashtag on Twitter, ABC7Xtra. Now, before we get to our discussion, let's recap what happened this week.
Go through your life for 1 week without any identifying documents and see the challenges that about 40,000 people in El Paso today and every single day go through.
Dozens of members of the Border Network for Human Rights showed up to City Council. With them, a petition with more than 10,000 signatures urging City Council to start a municipal ID program.
It has to be an identity theft proof card, not something like a library card. It's a little more sophisticated.
The city is exploring what the ID card could and should be used for, just for safety and identification, or also for city services like Sun Metro and libraries. Some cities even enable them to be like prepaid debit cards.
The more sophisticated you make that ID card, the more costly it's going to be.
New York spent about $8 million to get its program started.
We asked, well, community members, would you be willing to pay for it? And how much would you be willing to pay? And people resoundingly said, yes, of course, it's worth us paying for it.
All right, and joining us now are Robert Heyman with the Border Network for Human Rights. Thank you for joining us. Businesswoman Barbara Carrasco, thank you so much. Always good to see you. And Deputy City Manager David Almonte, thank you for staying up with us.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start. I have a question for you, Robert. You know, critics of these kinds of programs say that essentially completely integrating immigrants into the community is what they do, and that will eventually become a stealth path to a sort of de facto legal status.
Well, that's just not accurate. The city doesn't have the authority to change immigration law. That's an entirely federal issue. And quite frankly, what the city does is not going to affect migration flows significantly one way or another. Academic research has been entirely consistent in showing that the primary driving factors of behind international migration, accounting for upwards of 90% of international migration, is economic opportunity. And as long as the economy of the U.S. is strong relative to the rest of the world, that's why people are going to come. They're not going to come because El Paso has a municipal ID card.
Okay, Barbara, I wanted to ask you, an ID really is essential to live a normal life. You needed to cash checks, to rent housing, to visit your child's school, visit a friend in the hospital, but you need it for public safety too. If the police stop you, you need to show an ID. So why not afford people who have a hard time getting these documents the opportunity to get them?
Well, the problem with the way they've presented it, approximately 40,000 in El Paso don't have documentation. And if you see the groups that they want to help, the homeless, the veterans homeless, the domestic violence, children in foster care, the elderly, and the LGBT community, if you take those numbers together. For the homeless in El Paso, I found there were 1,397 people. Veterans, we have 152 homeless veterans. In foster care, I found that in 2013 there were 588 children that went through foster care from newborns through 17 years old. Those foster children who are transitioning out of the foster care are entitled to, from the state, their birth certificate, their Social Security, their immunization record, and their school records. That's at no cost to them. So I don't understand how these numbers are calculated into their numbers. The homeless in El Paso, we've got to applaud the El Paso Coalition for Homelessness, because there's only 152 in the street based on the 1,397 people. And if you want, and talking about the elderly, well, the state and the city have programs. If they said that if you have an individual who is taking care of an elderly person who doesn't have an identification.
So you're saying there's essentially not enough people who would truly benefit from this program. Do you want to respond to that, Robert?
Well, I mean, I think that's just not an understatement of how difficult it is to get a state-issued ID. I can remember we went to a briefing with law enforcement officials at Fort Bliss, and there was a gentleman there who works for a federal law enforcement agency. His mother-in-law, his elderly mother-in-law, had just moved here from Virginia, and they had been having months of difficulty in getting her a Texas identification. So I think just because ideally these documents would be available to people through existing programs, it doesn't always work out that way, especially because often getting something like a state-issued driver's license or a state-issued ID card is reliant on getting a document like a birth certificate. But to get a birth certificate, you have to go down to the county and present a photo ID. We need a way to overcome these hurdles to get people some form of documentation. I don't know that a municipally issued documentation is the end of the line, but it's a very good starting point for thousands of people in El Paso.
And David, I do have a question for you, but first I want to get to the bottom of this. She specifically questioned the numbers, though, the 40,000 people who you estimated in El Paso.
I'd like to address that. Based on the numbers that I got, 90% of the 40,000 would be who? The way it's been presented, you said it has nothing to do with immigration status. But it really does, because you're saying that these identification cards could be used in the event someone is stopped by law enforcement in order not to deport them. But that's just simply not true, because the only people who are not being deported are the 610,000 who successfully applied under the DACA executive order that the president signed. So they're the only ones that are not being deported, that have deferred deport. Wait a minute. The thing of it is, the way it's being presented, I believe that you are falsely giving these people false hope and a false sense of security, because those cards are not going to keep them from being deported. As a matter of fact, just 2 days ago, the president ordered Border Patrol and ICE to question immigrants that they come in contact with. If they feel that they qualify for DACA, they're not deported. But according to Representative Luis Gutierrez, the purpose of that is to determine if there are recent border crossers, illegal border crossers, and they are going to be put at the front of the line along with those who have committed crimes and be immediately deported. So to tell these people that they can use those identification cards for deportation, to defer deportation, is simply not true.
We haven't been telling people they can use these cards to defer deportation.
In the news releases you have been saying that.
Okay, let's give them a chance to respond.
What we know is that when police come into contact with an individual that they cannot identify, they have a legal obligation to be able to identify that person. The process that they use, especially around here, to identify most of those people, whether or not a crime has been committed, is to call in the Border Patrol. That's when people, it's that act of drawing in the Border Patrol that's problematic for thousands of families, even in this region, even when no crime has been committed. This is not about changing their legal status. It's not about giving them false hope for changing their legal status in the long term. It's about putting them in situations where if they encounter a police officer, they don't have to spend their time, and the police officer doesn't have to spend their time sitting there waiting to be able to identify this person. They have a means to do that.
I want to
upfront.
address that, and I want to ask David about this. In other cities with municipal IDs, police departments, some police departments have said they've improved the relationship between the immigrant community and law enforcement. In New Haven there, a lieutenant said, quote, "Immigrants are now less concerned about telling an officer of their victimization. The card has helped the New Haven Police Department with the reporting and solving of crimes." Would this make our community safer? Do you think that, David? What do you think?
Well, I can't disclose whether personally it will make it safer now, but I have, in our research, talking to Police Chief Allen, he's been talking to the law enforcement community, and our efforts have always been, we do not ask for proof of citizenship.
Right.
Because we do not want to discourage undocumented workers from reporting crime.
So what happens if a police department stops someone and they don't have an ID?
And that's come up before recently that they've asked, okay, somebody stops, they ran to the store, they didn't take their wallet, they're driving a car, they're stopped. Assistant Chief Garcia's police department in general tells me they have sufficient databases where they can question the individual and ensure that they are in proper possession of the vehicle and it is not a stolen vehicle, even though they don't have an ID on them. It won't preclude that they won't get a citation for violating the law, but they say they can verify identification even though the individual may not have one on them.
Okay. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Remember, you can be part of the conversation. You can call us at 915-496-1775, email at ABC7Extra@KVIA.com, or on Twitter at MariaGABC7. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. We're talking about municipal IDs tonight. I want to talk about the cost now. David, in your research, I know on Tuesday when we spoke, it was still very preliminary. Do you have a sense yet, an estimate, a ballpark number of how much this would cost the city of El Paso?
No, I don't, but Monday I'll be speaking to purchasing department who is doing that research for us, and they'll have some cost estimates on the equipment, the estimate for about 20,000 cards to initiate a program, and then we'll develop the staffing, what would be the requirement to get that done, okay? There's also decisions that need to be made on documentation that has to be submitted. Do we keep those on our files for retention, or do we simply verify and then give them back to the individual?
Okay, I want to make sure we go to our phone calls. We have Brenda from the Upper Valley on the phone. Brenda, hi, what's your comment or your question?
Question is, are these IDs going to assist the people in receiving social services such as food stamps, housing, medical care? Because, I mean, why should we foot the bill? I think, you know, we pay, we've worked all our lives, and we don't even get assistance when we need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Because they do it on gross pay. They do the analysis.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that the ID in New York City, and I know that there's 10 other cities that provide municipal IDs. None of them guarantee or grant city, state, or federal benefits.
Correct.
All right, we also have another caller. I believe it's Barbara from the Northeast. Barbara, what's your comment or your question?
Okay, I think that the veterans and the children and the homeless here need more help than the illegal aliens. This is our country, not theirs. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. I think it's clear that this sort of becomes an immigration issue. I mean, whether it is that or not, the perception is that it is. So how do we tackle that?
I'm sorry.
Let's go ahead.
Well, I really, if you don't mind, may I interject on cost?
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that the banks, and I've done some research on this, the banks only require specific documents in order to open a bank account. Now, if what Border Network is going to do require the same documents that the banks require, the banks already have a system set up, so what's the sense? The banks will take matricula, cultura, they accept that. There's several banks in El Paso that accept that, and the Mexican government issues that at the embassy to the to the Mexican citizens, and so do some Central American countries. What I don't understand is you're asking for $1 million up front, up to $300,000 a year thereafter, when the banks have the system, the documents that you're going to require in order for them to open a bank account have to comply with the federal regulations. And how are you going to differentiate who brings a document that can open a bank account and who doesn't? Because you have to verify that with the bank.
Robert?
Well, our idea is that these cards, which present a photograph, an identification number unique to that card, and other identifiers meet the federal requirements for those banks. So even if they're based off of someone bringing a birth certificate, a social security card, what the bank needs is a uniquely identifiable photo ID. And we can help people get those from other documents so that they can open up these bank accounts and these checking accounts with these IDs. It should, getting to this larger point of how we provide benefits to people, we're looking to open this to all residents of El Paso, to everyone in the city. We're not just looking to target one group or another. We're looking to include
But the question
everyone.
is the need. Who really needs this?
And the categories that you've listed, the state, the city, or the federal government is already providing that service. And you want $1 million and $300,000 yearly thereafter for a program to duplicate services.
If there are tens of thousands of people in this community who lack photo identification,
who are they? Is what we're asking. Because I've only identified approximately 2,500 from the list that you submitted.
You identified 2,500 from several groups, excluding children and students, excluding the elderly, excluding undocumented migrants. All of those who there are tens of thousands of who you didn't include in that number.
There are tens of thousands of migrants.
And moreover, there are huge numbers of U.S. citizens in this country who lack photo identification. The Brennan Center for Justice out of New York University has done studies showing that about 8% of U.S. citizens lack photo ID. About 12% of U.S. citizens who earn $25,000 a year or less lack photo ID. 16% of the elderly lack photo ID.
But there are avenues for them to get that. And talking about birth certificates.
But these avenues obviously aren't working for them.
I've got
if they
friends
don't have
who are
those
caring
ID.
for elderly that went to the Department of Motor Vehicle, that went for the voter registration card, and they got them, and it wasn't that difficult.
Okay.
The birth certificates, I was one who didn't have a birth certificate. It's not as difficult as you say. You got an affidavit from your aunts and your uncles that you were truly born and who your parents were, and that your.
But he's talking about indigent individuals as well.
Right. How does a homeless person get that affidavit? How does someone who doesn't have good access to resources, who has all of these other tasks and trials that they have to go through in the course of their life, have the time or have the resources to manage that process?
I want to make sure we get to our emails.
People get to a fundamental aspect of what they need to be able
to
live their lives.
$300,000 yearly thereafter when the services are available.
If you had to go through
and
your
the numbers
life
aren't there,
without an ID, if people you know had to go through your life without ID, this is worth that cost so we can help improve city services, make them run more efficiently so that police and fire don't have to wait around to be able to identify these people.
What percentage of people go through this? And if there are, and I'm not saying there's not, but what you should be doing is directing them to the avenue, to the facility, to the organization that provides that already and is already set up without
Okay,
cost.
let me make sure we get to our emails. This is from Andrew. We pay enough for people who come to the city who are undocumented. How can we justify paying for a service that already exists? Why don't we just help them get state ID cards? And this is from Vidal. I believe there is already an ID system in place called the Texas driver's license or Texas ID for legal residents. Why would you want to provide an illegal person with an ID? Illegal being the key word. This would be a waste of taxpayer dollars for a system that is already in place. For taxpayers who are watching this and who say, I'm not anti-immigrant, but I am a fiscal conservative, and I just don't believe it's a good use of taxpayer dollars.
So then let me say this. First of all, why do you want to subsidize having police sit around waiting to identify someone rather than being out on the street, out responding to emergency calls? Why do you want to subsidize overtime for the fire department so that they, or EMS, so that they're sitting around waiting to be able to identify someone rather than responding to actual emergencies. And moreover, we need to remember that everyone in this city is a taxpayer. People pay property taxes, whether it's through their home, on their house, or through their rent. People pay sales taxes. These undocumented migrants are taxpayers too, and there's tens of thousands of them, and they deserve city services as well as everyone else.
Okay, David, I'm sorry, I want to ask you about that. Would a municipal ID streamline the process? Would it make the police and fire department more efficient?
I don't think there are going to be created efficiencies due to that. As I indicated, the police do not look at undocumented workers and say, before I do anything for you, I need an ID. That is not the case. We do not want undocumented workers to fear reporting crime to the police department, okay? Therefore, we don't even ask for an ID. And as far as the fire department, emergency services are provided. We don't ask immediately, well, you don't have documentation, we're not going to provide service. Service is provided.
Right, but I can remember seeing a woman slip and fall in the county courthouse, and El Paso EMS went and provided aid to her. But then when it came as a matter of releasing her to her friends and family who were there with her, they couldn't do that until those people came up with someone who had ID. It took the EMS about 7 minutes to treat this woman who had slipped and fallen and hurt her leg. It took them another 15 or 20 to work out a person who had ID who could take custody of her from EMS. That's where the cost savings, that's where the time savings
But
comes.
you're talking about rare incidents. Does that warrant $1 million start up front and an additional $300,000 yearly thereafter? That it's, you know, this is, it's not about compassion or no compassion, or it's about making a common sense decision. Do the taxpayers of El Paso, do they want to put $1 million again and $300,000 thereafter on programs that you could probably direct these illegal immigrants, because 90% of this number, I believe, are illegal border crossers. You could direct them. You say banks, you say deportation. I've already told you how they can get the bank account. I've explained who's not going to be deported. And you're saying it's not about illegal status, then why are you asking for $1 million to do just that?
Ma'am, fundamentally, if it were that easy, if this problem were that easy to solve, there would not be a problem.
It may not
this
be
is
easy,
a problem
but it doesn't
because
warrant that
the
much
status
money
quo is failing.
from taxpayer dollars.
Okay, let's go to the phones. We have Carlos on the west side. Carlos in West El Paso. Hi, what's your comment or your question?
My question is, how do we go about financing a program such as this? I think there's other avenues other than to go to the public and say, let's increase your revenue into the city. How would a program like this, what are your visions of having it financed? Thank you.
Okay, would you like to take that? David also?
Yeah, there are lots of ways, as explored by other cities that have adopted these programs, that we can cost share this program out among a number of different users and beneficiaries.
Such as?
First of all, there are going to be application fees. There are going to be fees on the people who apply for these cards. And those fees will make up a fairly substantial amount of money, particularly of the annual operating costs for this program. Other cities like New Haven have worked to bring philanthropy into the program and to look on local philanthropy to help meet this need. Additionally, cities have looked to public-private partnerships, working with banks and credit unions to better integrate financial services and other services into these cards and help share some of the costs there. There are ways we can do this that will minimize the cost of the taxpayer at the same time that we can maximize benefits to the public.
Now, if the City Council were to approve this, though, there are some startup costs, right? I mean, you would need some capital, some equipment to make the ID cards. You were saying they're sophisticated ID cards. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, as I indicated, we're trying to gather those costs and what the expense would be, not just for equipment, but for operations. So there would be a fee involved with the card in order to generate sufficient funds to pay for all the equipment and everything over the next first year or two. Okay, so that would be one of the recommendations we would need, is that look at charging a fee to recoup the costs, but also to look at outside agencies to see if they have funding to help assist pay for all this equipment.
Okay, I really have to take a commercial break here. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Remember, you can call us at 496-1775, email us at ABC-7Extra@KVIA.com, or on Twitter, I'm at Maria G. ABC-7. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. We're talking about municipal IDs. I want to make sure I read some of the emails we've gotten. This is from Floyd. More spending on the back of citizens for these ID cards. No, this is just a way to give illegal individuals IDs to use to get into the too generous welfare system. People needing ID can go to the DMV and get one from the state of Texas if they qualify. We do want to make sure we point out that these IDs do not grant any sort of federal, local, or state benefit. And this is from Christina. She says, how do I volunteer to help such a program? I believe in this program and I would like to help these immigrants. That's Christina from the West Side. And this is, let's see here, from Roscoe. Why is this our problem? If you are here illegally, that's a problem. You need to take that up with whatever country you came from. Home veterans, the VA gives IDs to all veterans treated at VA facilities. For people who fundamentally say, why should our local governments make laws to accommodate, in this case, mostly undocumented immigrants who are here illegally? What do you say to that, Robert?
Well, ultimately, this has always been a program that is about serving the entirety of the public. And the city, as a home rule city under the Constitution of the state of Texas, has both the obligation and the authority to provide for the general welfare of its citizens. This ID program is in keeping with that provision for the general welfare.
And you know, you mentioned earlier today it's about a common sense decision. It's not about a lack of compassion. But for people who say, you know, this is about humanity in a way. This is about recognizing people who are here, maybe illegally, but still contribute to this community. And this is a way of saying, you know, through this ID card, we recognize your humanity. What do you think about that? What do you say to that, Barbara?
Well, you need to separate the two. They're talking $1 million and $300 yearly thereafter to implement this program. These people, these individuals that we're discussing, they have an avenue. There are agencies already that will provide them an ID. The banks are regulated by the federal government, the credit unions by the National Credit Union Association, specific guidelines as to who can open a bank account. Now, we're trying to tell these individuals that if you get this credit card, this identification card, life will be peachy for you, and that's not the case. That's just not the case. They need to understand that it's not going to be that simple for them. Banks require a minimum deposit. They're going to require fees if you don't keep the minimum deposit. If you don't use a debit card at the bank, there's going to be more fees there. So telling these individuals that things will be better for them is not the case, especially
but is that the message?
Well, because there's an avenue to. They can direct these individuals already to these agencies, and they can get their ID.
If the problem that these people have as a result of these IDs is that they have to meet a minimum account balance at a bank, that's a big step up from them having to go to a check casher because they don't have an ID.
But they can go there already without spending $1 million. And then let me give you an example. Under DACA, 1.7 million people were eligible for it. Less than a third applied. 610,000 successfully applied. What percentage of the 40,000 do you believe are going to apply? And talking about the fees that they're going to be charged, is it worth the $1 million that you're asking the taxpayers for and 300,000 thereafter? Are you going to have that many applicants? And is it going to become a magnet for El Paso? And is the number going to increase every year?
New York issued 6,000 cards in its first week. It took an additional 10,000 applications in its first 2 weeks that haven't been fully processed, and it's scheduled 100,000 interviews with applicants for these cards.
That's New York. We're talking El Paso.
We're talking El Paso,
40,000.
where 10,000 people presented a petition to City Council to get
who
these
are these
done.
people?
We have
We
a
don't
tweet
know.
from Eddie who said, how many of the signatures on the petition are from illegal aliens? Tax dollars shouldn't pay if they're here illegally.
Who's verifying?
Undocumented aliens are taxpayers, and moreover, 10,000 signatures of people who want these cards, whether they're undocumented or not. There's demand for it, demand from people willing to pay for it.
And we have a tweet from Tooths. In terms of crimes committed to people without IDs, the 13th Amendment extends the protection of the law to anybody in the U.S. So if they are hesitant to report crimes committed against them because of their lack of ID, this may help them feel more comfortable to report these crimes, making it safer for all El Paso as a whole. I just want to take Elizabeth on the phone. Elizabeth, if you can hear us with your comment or your question, our last phoner of the night.
What I don't understand is if you have to show ID to get this ID, why can't they use that as their identification? Why is it going to cost us, the citizens of the United States, more money? Thank you very much.
Do you want to address that?
This is about allowing people to access an identification card, get a photo identification for themselves with a slightly broader set of documents than what the state requires. What we are doing is striking a balance between people's need for ID and their ability to access ID through what they will have, and a need to keep the ID safe and secure. So we need to take in some form of identification from these applicants, but what we can do is, using current technology, using current databases, broaden that from what the state accepts so that more people, thousands of more people, will be able to get a photo ID and be able to demonstrate who they are than currently can.
Okay, all right, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this program informative and helpful, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.